Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we invite you to step beyond the veil of reality and into the shadowy realms of the unknown. Welcome to Whispers in the Dark, a journey into the depths of the human psyche and the mysteries that lie beyond our comprehension. In this series, each tale is a labyrinth of secrets and surprises, a journey not just through space and time, but through the inner corridors of the mind. Here, in the world of Whispers in the Dark, nothing is as it seems. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, the familiar turns alien, and the faint whispers in the dark hold truths more profound than the loudest declarations in the light. Tonight's story, like those that will follow, treads the fine line between the real and the surreal, the tangible and the ethereal. It challenges the boundaries of belief and tests the limits of reality. It's a tale of choices and consequences, of secrets hidden in the shadows, and of the unseen forces that shape our destinies. So, I urge you, dear viewer, to suspend your disbelief and open your mind, for in the world of Whispers in the Dark, the only thing more terrifying than the unknown is the possibility that you might actually find the answers you seek. Prepare to embark on a journey where the darkness whispers and its echoes reveal the mysteries of the universe and the enigmas of the soul. This is Whispers in the Dark. Michael Thompson awoke to the unfamiliar sound of a distant church bell chiming, a sound that seemed to belong to a different era. As he opened his eyes, he found himself in a room that was a stark contrast to the modern apartment he had fallen asleep in. The room was adorned with floral wallpaper. A ceiling fan that looked like it belonged in the mid-20th century was spinning overhead, and the air had a freshness that felt out of place in the 21st century. Sitting up in bed, Michael's confusion mounted. The furnishings around him were distinctly from the 1950s. An old-style tube radio sat on a dresser, and the family photographs on the walls were in black and white, featuring people dressed in mid-century attire. The room was a perfect replica of the era, down to the minutest details. Stepping out of bed, he felt the cool touch of polished hardwood under his feet. He made his way to the window and was met with a view that solidified his growing suspicion. Outside, the small town bustled with the life of a bygone era. The cars on the street were vintage models, and the passers-by were dressed in 1950s fashion. As he ventured outside, the reality of his situation began to sink in. The town square, with its old-fashioned general store, soda fountain, and classic movie theater, was exactly like the pictures he had seen of where his family had grown up. Michael had somehow woken up in the 1950s. Walking down the streets, he passed by landmarks he had only heard of in family stories. The local high school where his father had played baseball, the barbershop where his grandfather had taken him in photos. Everything was as it had been described to him, preserved in time. But this bewildering journey back in time had a poignant significance for Michael. He remembered the family stories of his younger sister, Emily, who had tragically died at the age of 10 from tetanus, contracted from a cut she got from a rusty pipe at the town's popular swimming hole. The memory of Emily, whom he never had the chance to meet, flooded back to him. In this time and place, Emily would be alive and well. A sense of purpose overtook Michael's initial shock. He had a chance to save his sister and change the course of his family's history. Michael knew what he had to do. He had to find Emily and prevent the tragic accident. As he made his way through the town, his heart was a mix of nervous anticipation and determination. He was a man out of his time, on a mission to rewrite a small yet significant piece of history. Determined, Michael set out to find the swimming hole, hoping to intercept Emily before history repeated itself. In his heart, he carried a hope that he could change the course of events and save his sister, a hope that gave him the courage to face the unknowns of his incredible journey through time. Michael, with a sense of urgency coursing through his veins, walked briskly through the streets of the small town. The sights and sounds of the 1950s surrounded him, children playing hopscotch on the sidewalks, the jingle of the ice cream truck in the distance, and the occasional honk of a horn from the classic cars that lined the streets. His heart raced as he glanced at a newspaper on a stand. The date confirmed his worst fears and greatest opportunity. It was the exact day his sister, Emily, had suffered the tragic accident that led to her untimely death. The story of that fateful day had been recounted so many times in his family, it was etched into his memory. With no time to lose, Michael broke into a run, heading straight for the swimming hole, a place of innocent childhood joy that had turned into a site of sorrow for his family. As he approached, he could hear the laughter and splashes of children, a stark reminder of the carefree days of youth. There, amidst a group of children, he spotted Emily. She was frolicking in the water, her laughter carefree and infectious. Michael's eyes quickly darted to the rusty pipe protruding from the bank, the silent harbinger of tragedy. Without a second thought, Michael plunged into the water, swimming with strong, determined strokes towards Emily. As he reached her, he wrapped his arm around her to pull her away from the pipe. In his haste and concern for Emily, he didn't notice the jagged edge of the pipe as it tore through his skin, a sharp pain shooting up his arm. Roles reversed, Michael found himself in Emily's place, with a deep gash in his arm. Emily, surprised by the sudden intervention of this stranger, looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Are you okay, mister?" she asked, concern in her young voice. "I'll be fine," Michael reassured her, masking his pain. "Let's get out of the water." Once on the bank, Emily insisted that he come to her house to get the wound treated. Michael hesitated, knowing that stepping into his family's home, as it was decades ago, would be an overwhelming experience. Walking alongside Emily, they soon reached her house, his grandparents' house, a place he knew well from stories and old photographs. Standing outside, looking at the familiar structure, was like stepping into a living memory. As they entered, Michael was greeted by the sight of his young mother. She was in her late 20s, vibrant and full of life, a stark contrast to the older, more somber version of her he had known. His heart ached with a mixture of joy and sadness as he watched her move about the kitchen, fetching a first aid kit. "Who's your friend, Emily?" his mother asked, her attention turning to Michael. "He got hurt saving me at the swimming hole," Emily replied. His mother's eyes met his, filled with gratitude and curiosity. "Thank you for looking out for her," she said, tending to his wound with a gentle touch. "I don't think we've met before. Are you new in town?" Michael nodded, unable to find the words to explain his true connection to her. "Just passing through," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. As he sat there, watching his mother and interacting with Emily, Michael was overwhelmed by the surreal nature of his situation. He was a man out of time, given a chance to see his family as they were before tragedy struck. Yet, in saving Emily, he had unknowingly taken her place, bearing the wound that was meant for her. In that moment, Michael realized the gravity of his actions. He had changed the course of his family's history, but at what cost to himself? As he pondered this, he knew that his journey through time was far from over, and the consequences of his actions were yet to unfold. After Michael was carefully bandaged by Emily's mother, the family, true to the 1950s ethos of hospitality, invited him to stay for dinner. Grateful and still reeling from the day's surreal events, Michael accepted their offer, finding himself drawn deeper into the past. He had only known through stories. Sitting at the dinner table with Emily's family, Michael felt as if he were living in a sepia-toned photograph come to life. The table was set with vintage china, and the meal, a classic spread of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans, was a throwback to simpler times. The family chatted amiably, discussing local news and events, while Michael listened, absorbing every detail, every nuance of the life his family once led. As he ate, Michael asked gentle, probing questions, careful not to reveal his true identity or origins. He inquired about the town, their family traditions, and subtly about Emily, trying to piece together the family history he'd heard so much about. Emily's parents, warm and congenial, shared stories, unwittingly filling gaps in Michael's knowledge of his family's past. The evening passed with a bittersweet mixture of joy and nostalgia for Michael. Here he was, sitting with family he'd never had the chance to meet, in a time that should have been long gone. It was an experience both heartwarming and heart-wrenching. As the night drew to a close, Emily's parents offered him a place to stay, insisting it was too late for a guest to leave. The hospitality of the era, coupled with their gratitude for his saving Emily, made the offer genuine and insistent. Michael, feeling a deep connection to the family and the house, accepted, overwhelmed by their kindness and his own swirling emotions. That night Michael slept in a guest room that seemed like a relic from the past, with its vintage decor and family heirlooms. Lying in bed, he reflected on the day's events, the miraculous and the mundane, and the strange twist of fate that had brought him here. However, as the night progressed, Michael's thoughts were interrupted by the onset of a high fever and profuse sweating. The pain from the cut he had received at the swimming hole intensified, and he tossed and turned, his mind clouded with worry. The reality of his situation began to sink in. He had taken Emily's place in more ways than one. In the early hours of the morning, as his condition worsened, Emily's mother, alarmed by his feverish state, called for the doctor. The town's doctor, a kind man with a gentle bedside manner, arrived promptly, carrying his medical bag, a staple of the era. As the doctor examined him, Michael tried to mask the severity of his symptoms, but the doctor's experienced eyes saw through his facade. "You've got a nasty infection from that cut," the doctor said, his tone serious. "We need to get you treated right away." Michael lay there, a mix of pain and worry etching his face. The realization that he might be facing the same fate as Emily had in the original timeline was a bitter pill to swallow. He had altered the past, but now he was living the unintended consequences of his actions. As the doctor administered antibiotics, the medical practices of the time being rudimentary, compared to what Michael was accustomed to, he couldn't help but wonder about the paradoxes of time travel. Had his attempt to change the past been in vain? Was fate merely correcting its course through him? Lying in the bed, shivering despite the blankets piled upon him, Michael grappled with the uncertainty of his situation. He had stepped into the past to save a family member, but now found himself fighting for his own life, a stranger in a familiar world. His journey through time had taken an unexpected turn, and now he faced a new challenge: survival. In the days that followed, Michael's condition oscillated between moments of lucidity and bouts of delirium. His nights were plagued with feverish dreams, an amalgamation of his two realities. In these dreams, faces from his own time and the 1950s merged, speaking to him about his illness in a chorus of voices that seemed both distant and intimately familiar. At times, he found himself struggling to wake up in his own era, in his modern apartment, feeling the soft fabric of his own bed. But just as quickly, the dream would shift, and he would be back in the 1950s, in the guest room of his grandparents' house, the vintage wallpaper blurring in his fevered vision. Amidst these shifting realities, Michael heard fragments of conversations that filled him with dread. He overheard the doctor speaking in hushed tones to Emily's parents, saying that there was little more he could do. "The fever has him now," the doctor said solemnly. "We can only hope for the best, but prepare for the worst." Trapped in a state of semi-consciousness, Michael was acutely aware of his surroundings, yet unable to fully awaken or communicate. It was as if he was a spectator in his own body, hearing the worried whispers of Emily's family, feeling their hands on his but unable to respond. This liminal state of existence left him scared and bewildered. What was happening to him? Was he slipping away, a victim of the very fate he had tried to avert for Emily? The line between life and death, past and present, seemed to blur, leaving Michael adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Then, as suddenly as he had fallen into this temporal and existential limbo, Michael awoke. But it was not in the 1950s. He was back in his own time, in his own bed, the familiar sights and sounds of the 21st century greeting him. However, something felt unmistakably off. The room around him was both recognizable and alien. Objects were slightly out of place, and the air had an unidentifiable quality to it. As he got up, his movements felt disjointed, as if he was out of sync with his surroundings. Venturing outside, the world he returned to seemed altered. The people he passed on the street appeared familiar, yet there was a subtleness in their behavior and interactions that felt different. Buildings and streets had minor discrepancies from his memories. Confusion and disorientation washed over Michael. Had his journey to the past changed his present? Or had his brush with death in the 1950s altered his perception of reality? As he walked through this slightly skewed version of his world, Michael grappled with the implications of his experience. He had tried to change the past, only to find himself back in a present that was not quite as he had left it. The realization dawned on him that his journey through time had consequences he could not have anticipated. Michael had awakened in a world that was familiar, yet foreign, a world that bore the subtle marks of his temporal interference. In this new reality, Michael faced the challenge of reorienting himself, of understanding the impact of his actions in the past, and of finding his place in a world that had subtly shifted from the one he knew. His adventure in time had come full circle, leaving him to navigate the echoes of the choices he had made in the echoes of yesterday. With a mind swirling in confusion and a heart heavy with unanswered questions, Michael decided to seek out the one place he hoped would offer him some clarity: his parents' house. The familiar streets seemed to hold a different aura now, as if they were tainted by the ripples of the changes he had set in motion. Upon reaching the house, a sense of trepidation gripped him. His hand hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. The door opened, and his mother stood there, her face reflecting a mixture of shock and recognition. "It's him, the man who saved Emily," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion before she fainted, collapsing into Michael's arms. Panic and confusion ensued as Michael called for help, his father rushing to the door. Upon seeing Michael, his father's expression mirrored that of his wife's, a blend of astonishment and disbelief. "What's happening? How do you know about Emily?" his father stammered, his eyes searching Michael's face for an explanation. "It's me, Dad, Michael," he said, his voice laced with a desperate need to be recognized. But the look in his father's eyes was clear. He saw Michael as a stranger, the mysterious savior of Emily, not as his son. The realization hit Michael like a tidal wave. In this altered reality, Emily had survived the accident at the swimming hole, but at a cost he couldn't have foreseen. Michael's place in his family had been erased. It was as though saving Emily had rewritten their family history, erasing him from their memories. Why had his act of saving Emily resulted in him being written out of his family's history? Was this the price of altering the past? His parents, still reeling from the shock, listened as Michael recounted his unbelievable story. He spoke of his journey back in time, his desperate attempt to save Emily, and the surreal experiences of living in two eras. But the more he explained, the more incredulous they looked. To them, he was a hero shrouded in mystery, not the son they never knew they had. As night fell, Michael stepped out of the house, the weight of his new reality pressing down on him. He had saved a life, but in doing so, he had lost his place in his own family, in his own world. In trying to rewrite history, he had become a mere footnote in the story of his own life, a ghost in the family album. As the stars twinkled above in the night sky, Michael understood that his life would never be the same again. He had become an anomaly in time, a man who existed but was not remembered, a living paradox in a world that had moved on without him. His story, like a whisper in the wind, was known to him alone, a solitary testament to the echoes of yesterday. Michael Thompson, once an ordinary man of the 21st century, found himself adrift in a reality where he no longer belonged. With each passing day, the weight of his altered existence grew heavier, a burden that clouded his every thought and haunted his every step. He wandered aimlessly, trying to start anew, but the shadows of his past life lingered, a constant reminder of what he had lost. The streets, the people, the very rhythm of life felt alien to him. He was a man out of sync with time, struggling to find his place in a world that had no memory of him. The days blurred into nights, and the nights into days. Michael grappled with the harsh reality of his situation. Why had fate chosen him for this cruel twist? He had only sought to save a life, to prevent a family tragedy. Yet in doing so, he had sacrificed his own place in the world, his own identity. His mind, unable to reconcile the life he once knew with the stark reality he now faced, began to fray at the edges. The strain of living as a man who should not exist took its toll, eroding his grasp on the present. In the end, unable to bear the burden of his anomalous existence, Michael's mind succumbed to the overwhelming paradox of his life. He found himself in a hospital for the mentally ill, a place where time seemed to stand still, and the outside world became a distant memory. There, sitting by a window with bars that framed a world he no longer recognized, Michael stared out with a vacant gaze. His eyes, once full of life and curiosity, now held a blank, hollow look. He was lost, in a limbo of his own making, a living ghost whose story was too extraordinary for reality to accommodate. The hospital staff knew him only as the quiet patient who gazed endlessly out the window, lost in a world of his own. They knew nothing of his incredible journey through time, of his noble act that had rewritten history, or of the family that had once been his. Michael Thompson, a man who had traversed the boundaries of time to save a life, now existed in a twilight of his own mind, a place where the past was a dream and the present a foggy haze. His story, a poignant tale of sacrifice and the unforeseen consequences of altering fate, faded into the whispers of time, leaving behind a man who should not be but was. And so, Michael sat, a solitary figure staring out the window, a testament to the fragile nature of reality and the profound impact of our choices. His journey through the echoes of yesterday had brought him to this quiet end, a man lost in time, forever gazing out at a world that had moved on without him.